Hello, welcome to today's webinar, O3's Incredible Infrastructure, a look under the hood, presented by David Hawthorne. Today's agenda includes a safety moment, a look at who O3 is, and then I'm going to introduce our speaker, Dave, and then he will take it away with a look at how O3's infrastructure is leading the AWP software industry. As a reminder, you can submit your questions throughout today's webinar via the GoToWebinar question button on your control panel, and we'll answer them at the end, time permitting. So today's safety moment is on cybersecurity in construction technology. It may seem obvious, but adhering to these important items, you can prevent a massive data breach or hacking at your organization. So some key factors to keep in mind are data protection. With that, it means all projects contain sensitive data, and the way to protect this is by implementing robust encryption methods and proper data storage. And then there's user access management, where you can ensure only authorized personnel have access to sensitive information. And then phishing awareness, you need to educate your team on recognizing phishing attempts and encourage reporting any suspicious activity. And then there's regular software updates. Outdated software can have vulnerabilities that hackers can exploit. And backup and recovery, ensure you have a robust disaster recovery plan in place to quickly restore operations. And then secure networks, avoid using public Wi-Fi. So with that, we will tell you a little bit about who O3 is. So we are the market-leading agile software built to support AWP. We're the only solution on the market with true work package management, no matter the size of your project, from small cap to mega. O3 is scalable and can support you where you are. And drilling down on that idea a little further, O3 includes the following experience as the leading AWP software, including change management, collaboration, automation, scalability, and optimization. So a quick snapshot of what our solutions include is that the ability to support the full project lifecycle with solutions for early phase planning, engineering and procurement, construction execution and work phase planning, systems completion, commissioning and startup, digital project management, and program and project portfolio management. And the biggest thing there is that O3 is the only true complete AWP software. So now let's introduce today's speaker, David Hawthorne. He's the Director of Cloud Engineering here at O3 Solutions. Dave has 20 years of experience across systems, software, and data engineering, including compliance environments. Thank you for joining us today, Dave.
Thank you, Tori. It gives me great pleasure to be here today, and I'm excited to talk about all the great things we do under the hood. I love sharing this stuff. I'm going to keep it at a high level, but if you have detailed questions, feel free, if you want to dive into some things a little bit further, to use that Q&A panel throughout the presentation. At the end, I'll address those as much as possible, time permitting. So with that, taking away with an overview, if there's three things you walk away from this presentation understanding, I hope you understand that O3 is truly a single tenant cloud native application built with scaling in mind and the project lifecycle in mind. At O3, we take a step above the traditional framework when it comes to security by layering additional controls and processes into our work structure to ensure that we are trusted service providers when it comes to your project's sensitive information and availability requirements. And then finally, as a cloud native application designed with a scaling focus, being developed first as a cloud native application is really a core value of ours. And that's enabled us to respond to the changing conditions of the cloud, as well as adapt to an evolving threat landscape on the security side. Before I dive in, let's take a good inventory of how O3 stands up against our competitors. Some competitors' setup is like assembling IKEA furniture blindfolded. At O3, it's a breeze. We can deploy all the resources securely in under an hour. While other companies rely on meshes of architectures with backend servers syncing across distributed data stores asynchronously, and so many microservices that you actually wonder if they have a service for every keystroke in the app, O3's infrastructure is simple and effective, and that enables us to scale without compromise while delivering our services at a low cost. Our availability is purpose-built according to best practices, and we're backed by a team with experience administering HA, or high availability, and disaster recovery in secure environments, as you'll see later. We've taken availability even further with some self-healing, and the result is predictable uptime with low maintenance overhead, where patches are deployed in minutes and not hours without an impact to the client. Later in this presentation, I'm excited to share our SSO approach. I think it really stands us apart because security shouldn't be isolated or relegated to just being a feature, or complex for that matter. O3's infrastructure, let's dive in. I'm going to talk about our architecture at a high level again, but feel free to dig in deeper as we go through this. So as I already said, O3 is exclusively single tenant. It's the only way that we deploy our resources. And we're going to talk about that in a cloud native context. One thing to point out is we don't do this alone. We follow the well-architected framework for guidance when it comes to requirements. And we use and inform that information to make the best decisions possible to serve our clients. Throughout our architecture and infrastructure development, we've always referred to this, and we look at how we can improve this continuously. Additionally, O3 is fault tolerant, as we'll see very soon in our availability slides. We're also vendor agnostic. This is a key component of any truly cloud native application. We don't rely on third-party components that could easily be integrated in the code. This allows us to be adaptable and flexible and meet clients where they are with their SLA requirements, compliance, and security needs. So a little bit about the cloud. This is going to be critical to understanding our philosophies as we move through all these slides. O3's infrastructure is designed to handle growth seamlessly on dedicated cloud resources. And there's two methodologies when it comes to scaling. O3 uses both. We have horizontal scaling and vertical scaling. If you think in terms like your laptop or a server in a co-located data center, we think in terms of what's known as vertical scaling. For example, that laptop that you're listening to this webinar on, if you want better performance, you're going to upgrade to a bigger CPU. You're going to add more memory, and that's going to improve your experience and enable you to do more with that laptop. But vertical scaling can only take you so far. There's only so many sockets and slots on a laptop. And the same is true about the cloud. If all you ever do is scale up vertically, you're going to hit a limit. What's exciting about O3, and continuing the analogy, is that horizontal scaling is in use, and that works by adding more laptops to the mix so that you're distributing that load across more resources, and that enables you to scale in both directions. We can scale up by adding compute, or we can scale out by adding additional instances. But what does this really mean? Well, we couldn't do it without end-to-end infrastructure as code. As the cloud matured, some improvements happened. And one of those improvements was that rather than just relying on application code, we're now able to write our infrastructure as code. And that all comes together to minimize human action, one of the key components of failure. And so much so that only 3 items actually exist, 3 actions exist in the procedure for standing up a new client's instance. If you're working in the CSP or the cloud service provider's user interface and clicking buttons and configuring there against a procedure, I guarantee you that eventually you will miss a step. And this is what I mean when I say true cloud native mindset. We've integrated the entire stack, whether app or infrastructure, into our code repositories to provide better oversight and minimize misconfigurations that can lead to security incidents. In today's world, to be agile, you have to deploy, and you have to deploy often. And in fact, we deploy to staging environments multiple times a day. It takes approximately 1 hour or less to onboard a new site. Most of that time is actually waiting on the cloud provider to stand up the resource. And as far as human interaction goes, as I noted previously, just 3 items. As a bonus, by having this declarative code, in a major outage, let's say that the entire West Coast goes down, all the data centers on the West Coast, we can redeploy to an entire stack or new region in the case of major outage very quickly. And that limits our exposure and shortens our response time. That's rare. That's a true disaster scenario, but we don't want to be a core component of that disaster. So we've invested heavily on our IAC or infrastructure as code. Well, we do have third-party components, packages in our source code. These are software packages as opposed to licensed services. The O3 code base relies on various software packages, but we don't build or pull in software packages that should be built in-house by those who best know what the client needs, right? O3's fully featured public API for integrations enables us to maintain our vendor agnostic side while supporting any other service that might come along now or in the future, such as AI. All this is great, but it's our culture that defines our success. And how we've managed to deliver secure, reliable project management software at affordable cost is all rooted in our Scrum and Agile methodology that we use internally. We're not just using an agile, or we're not just producing an agile project management tool for AWP. We're actually living it in everything we do from a culture perspective. And unlike a lot of organizations, we do this on both sides of the house, the infrastructure and the development. This means that we release every 2 weeks and we have a regular predictable velocity of how much we can deliver in each release. As you'll see in the following slides and the rest of the presentation, we've put out a really strong focus on the automation side and monitoring. But we've taken it a step further by using both of those things to improve performance and user experience. Resilience has increased our security, and we automate manual processes left and right until there's going to be no more. Finally, a core component of our cloud native application is flexibility. Our infrastructure is not dependent on being hosted on a certain type of resource, on a certain type of cloud provider. We have the flexibility and adaptability due to our excellent architecture on the software side. We have the flexibility to deploy to any region as allowed by law in our primary cloud service provider, whether that's Europe, Asia, etc. And again, we don't rely on vendor-specific components that can only be hosted in certain areas. Our capability to change in response to an incident based on our scenario planning really makes us stand out. That's one of those things that we just do a step further from the frameworks that really enable us to be agile. As I mentioned earlier, our culture is strong. We're tremendously proud of the work we do here to develop our strong DevOps culture, which integrates operations with development. It's one of the best cultures I've ever worked in, whether that's as a developer or as an engineer on the infrastructure side. At O3, we bring everyone together under the same roof and work together as one team. And the result is an incredible development team that incorporates our database administrators' feedback, our cloud engineers' feedback to heart. So not only are we improving our infrastructure, we're doing that in concert with our application code. And it's impossible to keep up with technology without prioritizing learning. We emphasize continuous learning and improvement whether that's through our observability or our metrics for our resources, which you'll see when we talk about incident response, and in many other ways. We participate in knowledge sharing, such as this webinar, as well as internal knowledge sharing. So what does agile development process really mean? I'm going to say agile a lot. Essentially, we plan, develop, test, deploy, and review, and all this happens both on software and infrastructure. A lot of organizations love agile for their software side, but often infrastructure gets left behind to waterfall methods. We don't do that at O3. The key takeaway from this is that enables us to deploy multiple times a day thanks to our continuous integration and deployment process. You cannot deploy multiple times a day unless you're doing something right. So it's true single tenancy. Taking a step back, looking at a high level, what is tenancy in a cloud context? With a single tenant architecture, that means that you're running on dedicated resources. Customer A has its own database, its own object storage for file uploads and imports, as well as dedicated compute nodes. And the advantage of this is that if customer A's compute spikes, it's not going to impact customer B. If something happens with a script, your exposure is very limited and contained. With a multi-tenant architecture, each customer lives in the same resource and they are logically segregated instead of physically. Prior experience in my line of work shows that if you want to cause a data breach, if you really want to cause a data breach and expose customer A to customer B, this is exactly how you do it. And a lot of times companies lean towards multi-tenancy as a cost savings measure. But as you'll find out, we don't have to. So obviously, I've already said, single tenant is always the way to go. It's the most secure for a number of reasons. Whereas multi-tenant architecture is a data breach and performance issue and availability issue just waiting to happen. The cloud has enabled us to do things at scale and manage all these different resources effectively under one roof without having to gobble or push them all together. But you may be asking yourself one question. If you are running dedicated resources for every single customer, how can that possibly be affordable? We offer the platform all the software and the tools at affordable cost. And it's pretty streamlined, mostly due to our observability being integrated with our continuous improvement. Often, improvements can be found in the code, provided you're looking and you actually put the effort forth to remediate. Our continuous assessment, alerting, and monitoring enables O3 to detect trends so that we can optimize service delivery. For example, O3 uses host-based load balancers backed by supporting compute nodes, which is a simple setup. And we also are able to build scenario-driven infrastructure to increase performance. We're going to see that in subsequent sections where we talk about our alerting and our chat ops, as well as our scaling philosophy. Our ability to commoditize or evolve our resources from a cloud service provider's offering to an off-the-shelf complete component that suits O3's product enables us to layer on additional capabilities so that we can meet clients where they are. So let's dive into the data side of the house. O3 uses a single source of truth data model. You can think of this like a common data environment where all data flows seamlessly and is centralized. There's no mixed or multiple fragmented databases. So for example, feature A doesn't have a dedicated database. Feature B doesn't have a dedicated database. Oftentimes you see this because people don't know how to optimize VLDBs or very large databases. That's not to say we don't use multiple databases. We have multiple databases. They're called replicas, and they serve a single purpose: high availability and disaster recovery. Looking forward into the future, when we think about scaling, we'll understand how that can be leveraged as a lever that we can pull to increase performance. With HA and DR, we can support high SLAs if necessary. I will note that depending on your requirements, that will impact contract pricing. So if you ask for a dozen replicas, uh, that may impact contract pricing. We also have security controls in our data architecture. We already talked about logical and physical segregation when it comes to tenancy, being single tenant or multi-tenant. We've also got network isolation, so A's traffic doesn't flow over to B's environment. And we've got full audit history and glass break, or just-in-time access. So let's say you're working on a project and you're waiting on a delivery, and your project can't move forward until that delivery occurs. You spend all your time waiting and waiting and waiting. Now, a SaaS application shouldn't be like that. And I'm not just talking about load times for a web page. I'm talking about all the other components. O3's monolithic common data database maintains all information under a common environment. And this means that async operations for certain features which require external processing won't break the integrity of your data. Unlike other systems, those features are baked fully into the O3 solution suite. To put it simply, we're one environment, many projects, which keeps the risk of operational data breaches minimal. Although we run centrally, that doesn't mean we're not distributed. In the event of a disaster, we can continue to be online by leveraging our HA replicas. Excuse me. On the security side, the logical and segregation doesn't just happen with the database. I do want to point out that that's also with our compute nodes. We also have host-based monitoring within the databases themselves for things like injection attacks and query performance. Our IDS is fully integrated. And one question that's asked frequently is, what are the limits of the amount of data that O3 can store? Well, if you've got solid architecture within your application code, it's not an issue because you support horizontal scaling. Oftentimes, what people think of most is being sharded. Luckily, we've taken a look at this and support and are capable of sharding out. So if you have a petabyte, which I doubt anyone ever would, but if you have a petabyte, we can meet you where you're at. Now, availability and disaster recovery. O3 understands that every minute your application is down means somebody is standing there and it's costing the business money. For that reason, we've invested heavily on availability and disaster recovery, but not just that, scenario planning. One thing that we do that's really exciting is point-in-time restoration. Let's say you have a catastrophic Sev1 security incident internally, and you need O3's help to investigate. Just tell us your time, and we will restore up to the minute on the day you specify. I think that's pretty awesome. Now, additional options are available when it comes to high availability, as I mentioned earlier, such as LTR and things like that. But just know that this could impact pricing in the master services agreement. But I think after looking under the hood at our availability setup, it will probably assuage any concerns you might have. So here's our availability setup. On the diagram here, I've simplified and consolidated some items to make it a little bit more digestible for the audience that may be varied in knowledge. Uh, for those of you that have worked with SQL Server availability groups, you're probably looking at this and saying synchronous commits happen at the storage layer and not the database and some other details. I understand that. I get that. But here, we're here to understand how this works. So here, I've got up top an Azure App Service as an example of a compute node. And those app services communicate to the database through a load balancer backed by a failover listener that detects when a database may be available or unavailable, and it automatically routes the traffic appropriately. To dive in a little bit deeper on a low level, we've got synchronous commits in the same region, and we've got asynchronous replicas distributed across other regions or zones. Commits occur using a voting quorum. That helps keep the performance high. So when two replicas have committed, they say, hey, we're good. And the database moves on, the primary replica moves on to the next operation, and the third one eventually consistent. Now let's say it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Nobody likes that 2 a.m. page. And one of the zones or regions is down. Luckily, we've got automatic and manual failover. And that means when that page goes off, we're going to investigate it, verify the risk of data loss, and issue a manual failover. But in a true outage scenario where upstream providers might fail because an entire cloud service provider is impacted, we've set predefined grace periods that allow us to automatically recover without intervention. We've shown how to handle availability and ensure that we maintain critical uptime, but let's go back to scaling and talk about some other resources. I want to pause here and do a recap of all the ways we accommodate scale scenarios. I'm going to lay out how we respond to events from a scaling mindset by sharing our philosophy as it applies to unintended events, which could be, or events that could be planned or unplanned. So vertical scaling is very helpful in an incident, right? And horizontal is also helpful in an incident. Our scale philosophy is that as a cloud native application, scale up events should be temporary in response to an incident or event. Improvements should be made as close to the event as possible, and effort is made to scale down following resolution. When something occurs, we're going to scale up so that we ensure that clients are able to work. This is rare. Then we're going to immediately create that ticket for remediation. We're going to look at the code, we're going to look at the query, we're going to look at whatever's going on, and we're going to fix it as close to the event as possible. That's one of the DevOps ideals, right? If you've ever read the Phoenix Project. And following that fix, every effort's going to be made to scale down. Now, the reason I point this out is because other businesses, I've worked in startups, and they have this philosophy where we'll just scale it. We got to get this feature out. We got to do this. We got to do that. And there's all these competing priorities. As we're agile, we've kind of eliminated a lot of that because we're predictable. And this has enabled us to really dig into how our application behaves and understand it. Because we're not just going to scale up vertically, we're going to scale up horizontally. There's a limit on how much you can vertically scale. And O3 really excels at ensuring that we have plenty of headroom for the long term. One thing I'd like to point out a little bit later as we dig in is how we handle scaling on other resources. So let's look at DevSecOps in action. That's development, security, and operations in action. Now, we don't have security here. That's because security isn't everything we do. I don't need a box for that because I've got it represented here. Storage, uh, partitioning, data, sharding, partitioning. One of the things I mentioned earlier now becomes apparent. If we need to improve performance across very large databases, we can split context to read replicas. Uh, some of you may be doing that internally with your reporting systems, right? We've got load balancing. If you think back to that last slide, you saw our application gateway, which is our load balancer. We deliver this internally through change management and security controls, and we'll dive into those in just a bit. Depending on client usage, we're going to implement auto scaling policies for periodic or compute intensive burst events, and vertically scaling the application while ensuring for cost optimization we're able to scale down. Our service plans enable vertical scaling, of course, while auto scaling plans enable horizontal scaling of the application instances. And then finally, our full observability, which means as a consumer of O3's application, you're going to spend less time in support when you have an issue. All of the development team is empowered to have all the metrics they need to fully understand end to end what happened when you report an issue. So with our change management, it's critical that we get this right. We like to prefer small, frequent changes over large-scale releases. Large-scale releases means things get missed. CrowdStrike, we've all dealt with, right? At O3, we bake everything into CI/CD automation. That's continuous integration and continuous delivery. When we get into the security side, we're going to learn about all the wonderful things we do there. We've got unit integration and performance tests baked into our agile release cycle. The unit tests verify that we haven't broken any functionality of the application. The integration tests verify the data integrity of the application. And our performance testing lets us know that if we make a change to a certain API endpoint, that it's not going to get worse when it comes to performance. We track latency pretty hardcore here. We've got zero downtime application deployment. We'll talk about that. And then rollback. Should a deployment go sideways, it's just a couple clicks to roll back and get you back up and running without the bad release. No, I haven't seen any of those really happen in the 3 years I've been here, but we purposely built this in mind so that we can accommodate this and offer high operational excellence. Perhaps as director of cloud engineering, one of the things I'm most proud of for our team is that our DORA metrics, if you look at the rankings of DORA metrics, we fall into that high category. Now we're on a 2-week release cadence. If we shorten that window a bit, we'd be in the highest. But we really don't see a business need for that at this point in time. On the security side, all of the application code requires pull requests, and this applies to both the application and infrastructure, as we noted earlier. We've got continuous compliance scanning of all of our resources, but also within our build pipeline. Before your O3's application code ever touches your data, it goes through over a dozen security checks and compliance verifications. We've got glass break protections. This means that no one has direct access to modify production without a valid change management ticket backed by a risk review that notes the impact, the reason, and the scope of the change and has been verified in a lower environment. If those things haven't been done on the change management ticket, you cannot access production. Layered controls. I'm going to love talking about this in a little bit as we get into the security side. If you've stuck with me so far, I keep bringing up that it's not what you build, it's how you build it. And that's the impression you should have so far. But what about when something goes wrong? Many of us in tech have recently dealt with how not to do things in emergency. Many DR plans were tested the past few days. If you're affected by that, my heart goes out to you. So I'm excited to share with you some of the ways in which we respond to adverse conditions and ensure that we provide the best availability and incident management in class. Scaling will only get you so far. Monitor, scale, and fix. We've already covered that. If you don't know what your application is doing at any point in time, you can't trust it. You don't own your application owns you. Really, though, it comes down to having robust, redundant architectures and putting continuous improvement into action. Given that we monitor and trace every request end to end across every resource, we're able to spot trends and isolate issues before they present themselves to a client. Scale then fix has really helped us out there. For example, on the database, let's say there's a query that's slow and affecting production. Someone gets paged before the client could even report it. Maybe they could fix it. Maybe it's more involved. In that case, we continue to work the problem outside of a production environment. But this allows O3 to be cost effective where others are not. Because we want to know before you know. The less time we spend dealing with support issues, the more features we're able to deliver to our customers. And a lot of that's thanks to an incredible development team, an incredible operations team, and all the investments we've done in ensuring that we have full application and cloud resource tracing and metrics. Dive into that a little bit further. We've got self-healing resources. Oftentimes we get paged, 5 minutes later it auto-resolves. We talked about auto-scale policies to handle burst events. But really, I keep talking about this, but to call out a few specifics is that every resource has an alert configured. On the database side, that might be injection attacks or security, could be query performance, could be read-write, IOPS. All of these are baked in to our incident management platform. On the compute side, we're tracking things like CPU, memory, failed requests. On the storage side, IOPS and latency. And then one resource that doesn't ever get the credit it deserves when it comes to integration with incident management is IDS and firewall alerts. If an anomalous access event happens where somebody's hammering the application, we're going to get paged. We're going to get notified. And we're going to respond to that incident very quickly. And it's all because of these investments we've made in our chat ops infrastructure, as well as our platform engineering. So we've got proactive issue detection and reporting. If an incident occurs, I'm going to get a phone call, I'm going to get a text, I'm going to get email, and I'm going to get a push notification. The response team is also looped in, even if they're not working the issue, because we've got it fully baked into our internal communications platform. We also have other alerts that aren't just in response to performance or availability. We continuously scan the compliance of our resources. And finally, we conduct post-incident reviews of every single incident. Putting it all together, multiple regions, internal stacks, external suite, we don't just monitor availability on our cloud service provider. What people generally miss is that you need to use resources in another provider. Otherwise, you're never going to get paged in a critical incident. Not just that, we distribute it across multiple cloud providers. We talked about resource utilization and then request tracing. We've also got resource availability. We're continuously monitoring Azure Service Health as well as other providers. We've also got AI anomaly detection to let us know when there's odd spikes. And on the security side, abnormal access events, our PAM, or our privileged access management, as well as infrastructure malware detection. So that means if you upload a file containing malware to O3, my phone's going to ring. We're going to initiate our response plan, investigate, and mitigate. And finally, we're SOC 2 Type 2, which is a wonderful compliance standard. When we think about how we got here, just a little bit more on philosophy so that I can explain slot staging and load balancing. We've got historical uptime at 100% for several clients. And we got there by taking our base SLA requirements and layering on top of that different features such as slot staging and load balancing. This enables us to have virtually zero downtime for software updates. I'm not going to say that some black swan event isn't going to come on where we might need to use our maintenance window, but it hasn't really happened today. And then furthermore, we add on additional SLA requirements as necessary, such as additional redundant backends and distributed data management. So if you think about that, for example, we can layer on behind our load balancer a backend in one region, a backend in another region, and a backend in another region. And it's this flexibility in architecture that's been battle tested. And as you can see, it's not just databases. We can flip the switch from standard mode to disaster mode easily using automations that we've built in incidents such as a load balancer failure. Last section that I'm going to cover here is going to be on security and what's really popular right now, artificial intelligence. At the core of any high-performing security program is going to be executive sponsorship. I can confidently say that we are backed by senior leadership, but it's not just them. It's also line managers and individual contributors that are looped in and participate in our management program. To date, we have had 0 security incidents on the O3 platform. And as I mentioned earlier, we're SOC 2 Type 2. O3 is fully GDPR compliant, and we have security controls around artificial intelligence, which we'll speak to on an upcoming slide. Finally, one thing I want to call out here is we retain a SOC analyst on staff who does threat hunting and improves our AppSec. They are able to initiate proactive investigations and make sure that we're running in tip-top shape. We're custodians of sensitive data. We understand that, and we need to treat it with respect. And for that reason, we have invested very much into our security program, whether that's annual or quarterly training and drills. But taking it a step further beyond compliance requirements for SOC 2, we're performing scenario planning and developing runbooks. A little bit about SOC 2 compliance, especially if you're used to ISO or some of that. SOC 2 is a gold standard for SaaS security. It's a compliance framework where we do an audit annually, which is conducted by a third party. Not only that, we also do annual API web application penetration testing. I do want to call out here where we exceed the SOC 2 framework. SOC 2 does, at least as far as our audit goes, SOC 2 requires mitigation of highs and criticals on a 5-point scale. So your top 2 worst offenders. Mediums, lows, you can backlog that. That's not good enough for O3. So we mitigate everything. And we are proud to say that we have 0 vulnerabilities in our penetration test. I talked about glass break protections a little bit earlier, so I won't go into that, but I would like to bring up defense in depth, which is layered controls. Some of the checks that we do before we ever get to production. We perform static code analysis. That includes OWASP top 10. We've got scanning for malware, and we've got vulnerability management. We're using multiple providers to conduct vulnerability management. And when you factor all this together, the net result is that we're one of the few percentage of organizations that have been pen tested by BreachLock and obtained BreachLock certification. 0 vulnerabilities. It's awesome. The next time you look over a pen test report, be sure to check how many issues are left open after retest. Next up, O3's excellence when it comes to our information security program. Our security is integrated within the product and infrastructure team. Our access reviews are automated. We have activity alerts. We could participate in monthly risk management meetings, which include senior leadership. Why do we do all this? Well, as a leader in the space, it's incumbent on us to ensure that our clients' data is protected. The entire operations team has experience in security environments and compliance requirements. In fact, as I noted earlier, given our staff, there's no reason why we shouldn't be investing in this. Another item that I'll dig into a little bit further, layered controls. So those compute nodes that I showed earlier have the exact same security policies applied to them as the load balancer on the front end. So let's say TLS wasn't enforced at the load balancer gateway for some reason. I can't think of why, given our automation. We enforce it at the application layer also. So hypothetically speaking, if TLS wasn't enforced at one point in the service, it would still be enforced. And that's just an example of where we take it a step further. It would never show up on an audit. It would never show up on external scanning, but we do it anyway because it's the right thing to do, and we're trusted custodians of sensitive information. A quick note on AI and security. O3 is investigating AI, and we've gone beyond chatbots for this. One of those features is digital paper and field imports, which uses AI detection to enable quick in the field updates. But everybody knows on this call, probably given the audience, that generative AI tools can enhance productivity, but are littered with security risks, such as leaking sensitive data, introducing vulnerabilities into code when developers are using it, and providing incorrect information. What I will say about O3 is that we are single tenant, and that means that anything AI is going to remain single tenant. So training data is client specific, and it never leaves the client's environment. We are not going to take a model that we trained on your data and use it for somebody else, because we understand that these generative AI tools can leak sensitive data. We've established a corporate AI policy that restricts the use and the data allowed. The quick summary of that is that O3 only allows constrained generative AI tools within its corporate and software environment. This means that we know how, where, and when data is used and secured in agreement or contract. I will say also that AI is a feature, it's a component, and you don't have to have it. So we're very aware of the changing landscape, and we want to be able to adapt to other people's corporate AI policies. And for that reason, we've taken this initial step of really planning and laying out what that means for the long term. And then finally, compliance, real quick. As I mentioned earlier, O3 is fully GDPR compliant, and we're also compliant with additional privacy laws such as PDPA for those of you in Malaysia. We adhere to principles for data collection use, disclosure, retention, and we provide individuals with rights regarding their data. I've included a quick slide here if you want to know several of the things that we do when it comes to testing, especially with security. You can refer to this. One thing I'll call out here is that we run runtime security on hosts, not just the databases, but our compute nodes. We also have software composition analysis and static application security testing, as well as dynamic. Last but not least, and probably my favorite thing out there, is that the biggest risk, according to a CISA survey of actual incidents, shows that aside from phishing, offboarding leads to the most security incidents in corporate organizations. To help shorten that loop, O3 goes the direct route with an integration when it comes to SSO. We don't create a B2C directory within our directory and then delegate that to your SSO. That's just complex. When you disable someone in your user directory, they get disabled in O3. This prevents hostile actors from doing damage during the offboarding process, and your IT crowd is going to thank you because it's one less thing they have to do on their offboarding checklist. Really, at the end of the day, I love the fact that we do not make anyone pay SSO tax. We serve a B2B context, which means we support B2B security, right? By offering single sign-on. It's just baked in. So some key takeaways to close this out. I've shown with our layered controls and other checks throughout our CI/CD process that we continuously exceed security requirements for SOC 2, including our pen tests, that we're scalable and can meet your project's needs, that we're a cloud-native application backed by a robust DevOps culture, that we're not brittle, we're battle-tested, and we don't rely on error-prone syncs to third-party software. We've got a robust incident response team, and we've managed to integrate that throughout everything we do, whether it's chat ops, dispatching, multi-channel. We're fault tolerant, self-healing by using those load balancers, both on the compute nodes and the database. And we go through a dozen security checks before we ever touch your data. And with that, we offer simple and easy SSO implementation. So I'll pause here and see if we have any questions. Tori?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. That's some excellent information. So as a reminder, if you have any questions, please submit them now. You can use your GoToWebinar chat panel there, and we will answer them again as time permits. So we have a few minutes left in the session, so let's get right to it. So first question, Dave, how is O3 able to adapt to changing conditions with the cloud?
Good question. As we all know in technology, it evolves at the speed of light. O3's platform and software always tracks latest releases, whether that's our dependencies in our code, and you can trust that we're performing updates as appropriate. The benefit of this, other than making sure that we patch any security issue, would be that we can take advantage of most cloud service provider offerings as soon as they are generally available. So AI gets a lot of talk, but we're well suited to handle these items and pass those benefits onto our clients as they arise because we track latest. And we're all clued in and keyed in. We follow all the tech radars with our CSPs, and we love technology.
Okay, next question. How does O3 Solutions integrate with other tools and platforms?
Interoperability is critical, and our platform is designed to be highly interoperable with a wide range of APIs and connectors to allow seamless integration. So our public API is actually documented. So your developers can get in there, understand what endpoint they need to use, what the parameters are, and why. So whether you're using project management tools, ERP systems, or other cloud services, our solution can integrate smoothly and provide a unified experience. We also offer customization options to tailor integrations to specific business needs.
Okay, next question, probably the last one we have as far as timing is concerned. So what are the future plans for enhancing the O3 Solutions platform?
So one of our core values is driven to innovate. And we're constantly innovating and enhancing our platform based on customer feedback as well as market trends. Future plans include expanding our AI and machine learning capabilities to offer predictive analytics, improving the user interface for better usability, and continuing to enhance our security features. We're also exploring new integrations and partnerships to provide even more value to our customers.
Okay, well, that is excellent. Thank you so much, Dave, for answering those questions. That is going to bring us right up to time here. So I'd like to leave you with some ways you can learn more. You can either contact us at info@o3.solutions. We'd love to hear from you. Provide us with feedback, ask us more questions, suggest future content or topics you'd like to see covered. And then you can always just go to our website. We have an immense amount of material there for you at your disposal, all free. We believe in educating the industry. So you can download case studies there, hear about how our clients have had success in the past using our solutions. You'll find industry data and trending topics. You can watch our past webinars. We've got a video library covering a multitude of things as well. And then always follow us on social media, and you can subscribe to our monthly newsletter. That way you always stay up to date with what we're doing and what's going on in the world of AWP. And with that, I will close this out. I'd like to thank Dave again for presenting and providing us with some very informative information surrounding O3's infrastructure. So thank you to everybody else who joined us today. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.